So I'm Tom Beyer. I'm the Director of Platform Development at Safari. For those of you who don't know, Safari sort of has two sides to their business. On the one hand, they are a licensee of content. They're an aggregator. The service provides over 40,000 titles for 12,000 hours of video, and is sold as a service. On the other side of the business, we provide a platform called Pub Factory as a service to publishers on which they build products. And that's really the side of the business that I'm on. And just to warn you, my background is in software. I'm a product person. I really care about interface. And so this talk is going to be at a very sort of granular level. I'm really going to talk about pixels on the page or on the digital page. In a way, this is sort of the digital equivalent of a typesetting talk, I think. So the title of the talk was, dealing with the flood and trying to make sense of it. And I think you sort of have to start with, we all know that there's just a tremendous amount of content out there. You go to any particular product and, you're offered up thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of results. But the question is that really a problem? And if so, why? And just to compound the problem, of course, it's not a static issue where there's this constant flood of new content that's coming at us all the time. But is it, so what's going on there? Is it really a problem? Now, the subtitle of my talk dealt with serendipity and dealing with serendipity and trying to bring that back into our interfaces. And it was sort of ironic that last week I became aware that Sage was just publishing a white paper about serendipity that came out. It's really an interesting read. There's actually a webinar that's going on this afternoon, unfortunately. And Alan, who was helping Martha with the innovation workshop, was one of the authors, and Letty Conrad in California. But one of the things that I liked from the paper was this grid that sort of laid out sort of mapped out how people are sort of looking for content, and the sort of, people who know what they're looking for and know where to look versus people who don't know where they're looking for but might know where they're looking, and they map out the four squares. And I think that when we're talking about that big flood of content and everything, it really isn't as much of a problem for the people who know what they're looking for, who are the experts in their field. There's clearly lots of issues with discoverability and the rest of it, but in a sense, that's sort of not, I think, where the problem is. I think where the problem is are in those bottom two boxes, in providing serendipity and providing sort of exploring and how to explore through the content. So if we really think about that a little bit, and talk about sort of the modes of navigation within a platform, we'll ignore search for now, but sort of the two main avenues that we've had traditionally for sort of trying to get at that sort of serendipity or the exploring mode of a user is through related document links and through browsing interfaces. And so let's just spend a little bit of time thinking about related links. A lot of work goes into producing these links. There's the tremendous amount of content enrichment and really trying to make these links good. But sometimes the breakdown is actually at that final mile, the actual presentation of those links. For instance, in the top figure there, one of the suggestions on the link is appendices. And the poor user who ended up on this page, that really might be the content that they really were looking for, but they'll never know based on that interface. So how can we make it better? Well, clearly, there's a lot of work that can go on behind the scenes to improve the quality of the links, to make them better. But are there other things that we can do? Well, one thing is to sort of expand the range of those links. One thing that OEP does is they provide sort of little module that they power through the Oxford Index that provides links across all of their products. So at any point within a product, you can sort of bring up these links if you sort of realize as a user and as a sort of less experienced user that, wait a sec, I'm not quite in the right place. Maybe I should be searching for similar things somewhere else. And so that's what's trying to happen there through that index. Other ways that you might improve the links, though, is actually that user interface itself. I mean, really working on that. Looking at the Safari service, the service tries to actually give much more context around the link, tries to give the user a sense of what the thing is. And not only that, but even privileges the whole idea of recommendations to an area of the site. So there's actually one of the primary nav elements is recommendations for you, and so doing that, and also when at the end of anything that you read on the Safari service, there are sort of recommendations. And in addition to sort of trying to provide a more better complete interface so that you can see a better context, we've also, the service also gives some indication of why that link was suggested to you, either through content relationships or subjects that you've expressed interest in, or things that other users have read. And again, sort of giving the reason why the platform thinks it might be interesting to you. Another example of that I've seen recently is on Springer, where they've spent a certain amount of time really analyzing their content, trying to pull out the concepts, and then there's an area on the page where you can go and, looking at those individual concepts, look at the links related to them, and also providing sort of this visual concept map to try to give you a better sense of the overall relationships of these links. But at the end of the day, we're really just talking about sets of links. And so that's sort of the state of affairs right now in terms of serendipity, of sort of trying to grab a user who's found themselves on your site and trying to provide them sort of opportunities if where they landed wasn't really where they wanted to be. If we think about exploring your site, with these huge sites with lots and lots of content, can we give that some shape? And the traditional way to do that in the platforms has been sort of by overlaying a taxonomy on the content to give users a way to sort of navigate through this. This is a little bit more common, I think, on the book and reference world than it is in journals, because journals themselves give a certain amount of that sort of curation. But I think it's useful everywhere. So you have an interface. It provides a subject taxonomy. You can select some item in that taxonomy. And you're given a list of content, and maybe you've been given sort of featured things in that subject area that the publisher thinks are particularly interesting, based on either their knowledge or perhaps user behavior, whatever. And maybe there's ways of filtering that content further, similar to search filters, things like that. But are there ways that we can improve this interface? One possibility is to work more on your taxonomies themselves. So when you're thinking about taxonomies, you have sort of choices. There are some industry standard taxonomies that may or may not be useful given the sort of nature of your content. Oftentimes it makes more sense to use internal taxonomies because they're crafted to the content collection itself. There the question is, how finely grained is your content tagged? Are you prepared to really tag it to the level of a really big taxonomy that you create? There's a certain amount of effort there. Another idea is to take multiple taxonomies and allow the user to apply multiple different taxonomies to really scale down to some subset of content that is perhaps really matches their interest. But again, at the end, they're sort of left with a list of links. Something that some products do is actually use ontologies, and that's nice because what it does is actually allows you to sort of label the way in which content is related. Somewhat similar to the way we were talking about with related links, giving the user some idea of why it is that they're suggesting this content to you. This is an example from Sage Research Methods where, in addition to sort of navigating the tree of research methods, topics, you can also, it pulls out, both related methods and contrasting methods. Another thing that I would really like to see and haven't much in products, again, going back to the idea of trying to sort of cater to less experienced users, less expert users, is how about links that indicate, do you need content that's more general than what you're looking at right now? Do you need content that's more specific? Where are you, navigating sort of hierarchically that way through the content? And then, of course, there's also, in the Sage case, they actually felt that the ontology that they had developed for the product was so useful that in and of itself that building a sort of visual interface through it was worthwhile. But I'll have to admit that at the end of the day, for both, this idea of trying to sort of induce serendipity and allow for sort of exploring through the subject categorizations of the products, it's a little unsatisfying, and it's, and why is that? What's missing? And I think what's missing is context. A lot of the platforms don't do a very good job of providing sort of context around their content, giving it, a shape, giving it sort of an explanation for why this set of content is of interest, and sort of placing it within the larger sort of shape of the discipline, sort of giving some of there's, a whole. What we're dealing with are the individual content items, but we're sort of missing a lot of the sort of implicit knowledge that expert users in any particular discipline will know. To take sort of an example from Safari, sort of, which is much less academically focused, but one thing that was added to the service about a year ago is this idea of tutorials or learning paths, where they actually go out and they get subject matter experts to write about particular topics and provide an overview of that topic, provide a selection of the content, give a sort of ordered way through the content, and the service actually developed an interface around this so that users could really track their progress through the learning path and see, and pick and choose, and also very quickly see, what content would require more or less time, what order does, the person who put this thing together think that it should be read in. And introducing each of those pieces of content, put it in context of that learning path. And I think that this, kind of interface provides a significant sort of way in for less knowledgeable users, and sort of gets at like some of the learning outcomes that my friend Tom was talking about just before me. Now I just want to take a slight diversion. Everything I've talked about right now is, up till now, has been sort of talking about how to sort of connect content together. The ways that the platforms are doing it now and ways we might do it in the future. Let's look at the content itself. Can the content itself be sort of exploded or made better use of? If you give me a PDF, I'll give it back to you. There's not much I can do with it. As a platform provider, it's hard to unpack. But if you have rich, full text or XML underlying that, there's structure to that content. And what we're seeing here is, of course, the lens interface to an article from eLife. So it's starting to sort of unpack that article and try to present it in a way that matches the way users want to actually interact with it online, and make it sort of more useful in that online context. Now, interestingly, at the innovation workshop yesterday, somebody mentioned that one of the sort of hidden values of journals is that they provide sort of implicit rules about what constitutes real research in their discipline. You know, what a research article has to sort of conform to make sense in that discipline. And yet the journal platforms tend to have a very uniform interface and don't necessarily reflect that kind of difference across the disciplines. And that's an area where I think, again, if we can bring that stuff out in the interface, it can actually be super useful to people who are less experienced, to actually see those kinds of requirements reflected in the interface, and to have the interface sort of reflect those structures. Another sort of related example is Oxford Scholarly Editions. These are highly edited, amended, very complicated books of primary source material. And what this product does is it sort of rips them apart of their bookness, pulls the different kinds of content out, the primary source material, the translations, the notes, the core agenda, all of that stuff, and then sort of puts it back together in an interface that tries to really focus on the way the scholar wants to interact with the content. And not only that, but also then goes further and allows them to sort of stack up different content from different books or different works and different notes together, in a way that tries to mimic the way they actually work. All of this, that sort of, and thinking about that sort of pulling apart of the content, sort of got me thinking about the idea of tutorials or learning paths in academic content, because there are a lot of products that sort of are very, or a lot of content in academia that is of that same structure as those learning paths. Oxford Bibliographies, tries to give, links out to really important articles within disciplines. It lacks the context of that subject matter expert that we were talking to, but there are certainly lots of other cases, review articles, survey articles. On the Elgar site, on Elgar Online, they have a kind of book called a research review, which is commissioned to a highly renowned scholar in whatever discipline, where they actually do a sort of a survey of that discipline. They and then provide sort of annotated links to the content. But it's then sort of packaged as a book and dumped into a book collection where it's sort of lost. And because it's a book, it's really not very discoverable. Whereas, if you could sort of unpack this, provide an interface to it, it could actually provide a lot of really useful content for discoverability of the underlying, sort of discipline that it covers. And again, that discoverability could provide a way in for the sort of less experienced, the sort of more general lay population that could be interested in this content. There are some issues, of course, because unless you're a publisher that really has a lock on a particular domain, these kinds of survey articles will cover something much more than what a single publisher encompasses. And so they will lead out all over the place. And so it may be that, what we're really talking about is a layer of content that's above the sort of individual publisher platforms that can provide the sort of contextual environment for understanding the disciplines across all the scholarly work that's going on. So in conclusion, I guess what I'm really what I'd really like to sort of emphasize is that we need to make our platforms more amenable to the less experienced, to the people who are coming in and exploring, to giving affordances for serendipity to happen. And a lot of that has to do with really concentrating on the user experience. A lot of failure happens in the very last mile. And of course, all of this requires a lot of metadata and a lot of content that provides context. So, the solution to the flood of content is more content, I suppose. But to a certain extent, in the academic world, we may actually be able to take advantage of some of the content that's already being written. And in fact, something else that, as you think about this, there's just a tremendous sort of amount of work on doing literature reviews. Every grad student has to do this. And it would be really awesome if there was a platform that provided an opportunity to do that in a way that provided the content that was put together for other people to add on to it, to amend to disagree with, because of course, this is academia after all. But anyways, so I hope that provides just a little bit of food for thought on how we might actually, at the sort of interface level of our platforms, cater to a wider audience and a less, and the less expert audience.